Well, I am showing on my clock here in Colorado that it is 8 o'clock, and I do like to kind of reward people for showing up on time. We have a small group today, but I think that that will work well. And it may very well be, I think we're entering a really busy time in libraries right now. Are we opening? Are we closing? School's in session. Also, people may be tired of talking about resilience, and that is totally okay. That's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do the session today. So we'll go ahead and jump on in. So hello and welcome to Re-envisioning Resilience, Library Leaders as Critical Supporting Characters. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library. Just a couple of very quick housekeeping items. We are going to ask that you keep your mics muted for today. We're going to use chat for questions and activities. Most likely we'll have some time at the end if there are additional questions where you can unmute and ask questions then. Feel free to keep your video on or off as you see fit and works with your bandwidth. Sometimes it's I think helpful when you're attending sessions to see other faces, so other than just the presenters, so feel free to do that. As I mentioned just a minute ago, you should have all received a copy of the playbook for today's session. It is designed to sort of walk you through the session and allow you to take notes. I will make the slides available after the session. And
what's up?
And Matthew, if I can have you mute Andrea for me. That would be great. And I will make a copy of the slides available.
Oh, are those your ornaments?
Hang on, just let's see. I don't know if I can. 1 second. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Lastly, if you did attend the September resilience session where we focused on individual resilience, some of the very introductory material will be familiar with you, but we're going to shift everything to look at everything through a different leadership lens. So I think we will go ahead and jump on in. So just to start, what is resilience? So I began reading and researching resilience a few years ago, but many of the traditional definitions and solutions for resilience just didn't resonate with me. There was too much emphasis on the individual having to persist no matter what, to bounce back in the face of any challenge, and to frequently do more with less, even to somehow make up for larger systemic issues. In fact, there actually has been a pushback in libraries regarding the resilience narrative for promoting the idea that library staff can and should be more resilient on their own. And this left me very uninspired and unmotivated. So as I continued to dig deeper into resilience, I discovered research on community resilience put out by the Carbon Institute that states that resilience is not about bouncing back to the same state you were before, but about preserving the system's identity in the face of disruption. And the system's identity, the essential qualities that define what it is and what it does, is determined by its values. So if you do have a copy of the playbook, the full definition is listed on page 2, if you're curious about that. So this really struck a chord with me, and I began to see how this systems framework can apply to individuals, to organizations, to our profession, and to the communities that we serve. Now, not all systems should be preserved, even in librarianship. But if we look at the second part of the definition, we are talking about being intentional with what we keep. And we do that by starting with our values. So I went back through all of my notes on resilience and began pulling out frequent keywords and themes that spoke to me and aligned with my new view of resilience. So from there, I drew a Venn diagram. You also have a copy of that on page 3 of the playbook. That encompasses what resilience looks like to me. So we're going to walk through this, and then we'll go more in depth as we talk about what this looks like at work. So the first major concept is meaning, purpose, or ikigai, loosely translated as your reason for being. Next, we have hope. Hope is the willpower or mental energy and way power, the strategies we use to reach future goals. Well-being is the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy, and it encompasses physical, mental, emotional, workplace, and social health. And connection is the critical support of family, friends, work, and society. So each of these four components, I believe, are important to building resilience, but I think that there is overlap as well. Hope and purpose or meaning are both working towards a future goal. They rely on a shift in mindset or the belief that the future will be better than today, and a clear understanding of values, whether it be the individual's values, organizational, or professional. The goals then become those values in action. If we combine hope and well-being, we focus on personal strengths to increase physical, mental, and social health. So hope is the key to well-being because it gives you the fuel to learn, grow, and practice new skills. If we look at well-being and connection, we're really looking at learning and growing together and acknowledging and relying on each other's strengths and having compassion for self and for others. And then purpose and connection shifts the focus to shared values. It calls for compassion for others and a desire to be part of something bigger than ourselves. So we're going to dig deeper into each of these today as we look at resilience from a leadership lens. And I'll be giving some examples, and we'll be doing some brainstorming and some activities to see how we can show up at work with this. I do think it's important to point out that I myself have never worked as a manager or a supervisor, so I can't really speak to that experience outside of what I have researched. But I do believe that what we discussed today really works on a spectrum from informal to formal leadership, and that all of us have a part to play regardless of title. So lastly, while everything we talk about today is based upon research, the Venn diagram and how I view these components are my interpretations. So as we go through today, I am 100% open to your thoughts, your ideas, your questions, even challenges, because this is something that I'm still working on. Realistically, what I hope you get from today's session is the idea that resilience is deeply personal. It's not one size fits all, and it's going to look and feel different for everyone. And I think this is really important when we're talking about workplace resilience. Employees cannot be resilient alone. It requires support at many levels, and organizational culture has a huge impact on employee resilience. So leaders, once again, at all levels, play a critical supporting role in the overall resilience and well-being of their colleagues. And then secondly, that there are tools and strategies that leaders can use to support organizational and staff resilience. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to cover quite a bit of information today, and not everything we talk about is going to resonate with each and every one of you. But what I really hope is that you leave the session inspired to investigate and to experiment. And at the end of the playbook, there's a huge list of resources that provides a reading list, reflection questions, and activities that you can use either on your own or with other people at work. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So we're going to start with meaning and purpose. So I think it's good to start with the definition of meaning and purpose. And I think a lot of times when we read things, purpose and meaning can be interchanged with being happy. Happiness, or hedonia, is a positive mental and emotional state. It's all about feeling good, but it can be rather fleeting. Meaning, on the other hand, or eudaimonia, is not a mental state, but rather something that you do. It's all about human flourishing, or cultivating the best qualities within yourself and living up to your potential. According to Ken Mogi, a neuroscientist and author of the Little Book of Ikigai, he states in Japanese, Iki means to live and gai means reason. So Ikigai is a reason to live, and that's very much connected to that meaning piece. Ikigai exists on a spectrum that includes all of the things that we value, from the little joys in life to life-defining goals. Emily Esfahani Smith, author of The Power of Meaning, Crafting a Life That Matters, she breaks meaning into 4 pillars: belonging, purpose, transcendence, and storytelling. So let's take a closer look at what each looks like at work, and then talk about how we can foster each pillar in the workplace. So if you have the playbook handy, you can look at page 4 or use that to take notes. So belonging at work is all about feeling recognized, valued, and respected and valued for more than what it is that you produce. It's really being connected to the organization and to the people that work there. So when you don't feel like you belong, you can feel devalued and invisible. So when we talk about how leaders can foster belonging at work, we're really talking about two concepts. One is shifting from focusing on productivity to focusing on fulfillment. We really want to help all of the employees, all of our peers, recognize the impact that they have on the organization and the people that we serve, the relationships, how we can all grow together. And this relies on clearly communicating the organization's vision and values, but in a way that helps everybody that works there see their place in the big picture. So of course, management plays a crucial role in communicating the organizational mission and vision, but I think that we can all initiate ongoing conversations that help ourselves and others think about how the work that we do every day is meaningful, how it connects to the larger organizational value. So here's a quick example, and I apologize for the photographs, they're not awesome. But several years ago, the Colorado State Library staff created their own collectible playing cards to hand out at our annual State Library Conference. And this gave us all the opportunity to reflect on our work and how we might describe ourselves and the work we do in a fun way. So on my playing card, I am the Empower Mentor. My superpower is to help others access their superpowers through lifelong learning. My secret weapon is empathy galore, and my catchphrase is opening doors to a world of opportunities. So it's kind of silly, kind of fun, but as we were creating these playing cards, we actually were having lots of conversations with one another about what we do and how our strengths show up at work. So that's just kind of one example of how we can generate some of these conversations. If we look at the next pillar, which is purpose, purpose has to do with a stable and far-reaching goal. It's aspirational and it's connected to our values. So you're going to hear me talk about values quite a bit today. Purpose also is a mindset. It's a way of viewing what you do as having some intrinsic value, contributing to something that's bigger than ourselves. So when we talk about purpose at work, it's all about aligning individual values and goals to the organizational mission, vision, and values. As we stated when we were looking at hope and purpose, future goals give meaning and action to our values. So staff at all levels need to clearly understand the organization's ikigai, or reason for being, and then how their work connects to that. Once again, management's role is to develop potential in employees and really kind of help direct that potential towards common goals, whether they be organizational goals, team goals, community goals, since we're talking about librarianship. But as we mentioned before, I think leaders at all levels can help others see how their work can be meaningful. So when we're talking about fostering purpose at work, it comes down to a couple of things. Hopefully, management and the organization create and communicate clear job expectations. Everybody in the organization needs to be clear on what it is we're supposed to accomplish. But how can we, once again, at all levels, help each other find that balance between that structure and freedom? How can we help figure out like what the constraints are? So, you know, we have to do X number of tasks, and these maybe are the budget or the time frame, but then have conversations about where there's white space in the work, where individuals can bring their own style and autonomy. Have those discussions about where the hard lines are and then where it's okay to color outside them. I think it's also a good idea to have ongoing conversations about organizational, team, and individual strengths and those values and motivations so that we can help everybody reframe work tasks as opportunities to help others see the positive impact of their work. And this can show up in a variety of ways. Obviously, if you're working directly with the public, you're helping the public, but there's lots of behind the scenes staff in libraries. And then even my job, you know, working at the state library. So another example I can provide from my own experience is When I got my job as the professional development coordinator at the state library, professional development is huge, training on all kinds of topic. And I reach staff that are statewide, so that is also big. So what I did is I created a vision statement for the work that I do. Talked about it with my current boss at the time. I now have a fairly new boss, so I'm sharing that with her. Once again, it allows me to stay connected with what it is that I'm doing. I can connect my vision statement to those of the larger organization, but it allows me to talk to others and helps them see my own aspirations for the work that I do and kind of creating those conversations. And then I think lastly that we all can have conversations and help connect others to opportunities for staff at all levels to lead, to advise, to facilitate, to share their ideas so that everybody can become part of the larger organizational strategies and direction setting. The next pillar is transcendence. And that is all about being part of something bigger than yourself. Emily Esfahani Smith says that when we experience awe, whether it be when we're in nature or having, I don't know, a moment with a patron or, something else, it actually challenges our mental models of the world. It changes how we think about things. So when we're talking about this at work, it's really those rare moments where you're lifted above the day-to-day. You experience a higher reality. You're able to sort of step outside of yourself and shift your perspective. A lot of times this happens where you sort of lose track of time. I don't know if many of you have like kind of tasks where you're working on it and you really have no idea that so much time has passed. It sounds big, but it actually can be found in little moments if we're remembering the spectrum of Ikigai. So when we're talking about transcendence, how can leaders help foster that at work? It is all about helping people find flow and also making time for fun and play. So how many of you have heard the concept of flow before? You can raise your hand or you can put it in chat. But there's a positive psychologist, and I'm not going to pronounce this name correctly, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. According to him, flow is a state of mind in which a person becomes fully immersed in an activity. So it should be something that you enjoy or find intrinsically rewarding. It's a task that you're good at, but still provides a little bit of a challenge. But once again, you experience that distorted sense of time. It involves taking time and having time for reflection and creativity. So I'm going to ask those of you who are here today, do any of you have activities either at work or at home where you experience flow, maybe a hobby or something like that? So feel free to put that in the chat area. Anybody experience anything where sort of time manages to disappear? Maybe it's literally happens every Sunday when you wake up and it's Sunday and suddenly it's Sunday night, we have to go back to work. Okay, well, hopefully, even though you're not adding it to chat, oh, reading gets me there. Thank you, Ruth. Yes, reading for me, that's definitely one. Anyone else have a thought? Playing sports or other hobbies that where you're just really immersed? Making crafts, excellent, yes. And that could happen depending on your job. That could happen at work or it could happen at home. I think there's lots of, I don't know, maybe photography for some people where you're kind of out in nature maybe, or, and just time seems to fly because you're just so immersed and focused. So thank you for those of you that shared that. The second piece is making time for fun and play. And there is a lot of research. Once again, I've included some in your playbook that states that play at work leads to better work relationships, increased productivity, reduction in stress, improved skill development. It allows us to be more creative and adaptable. And there's a quote from Brian Sutton Smith, and he's listed in your resources as well. And he states that the opposite of play is not work, it is depression. So can any of you think of ways that we can either encourage flow or play at work? You guys didn't know that I was going to be quizzing you on all of this. Any thoughts on how we can make that happen? So as you're going through your workday, are there, do you have time that you can set aside for reflection and creativity? If you happen to supervise others, is there a way that you can encourage them to build that into their day? I know it seems like, even despite all of the technological advances we have, that it seems like we still have less and less time for some of those creative moments. But thinking about ways that we can, once again, kind of help people reach that flow state, get them immersed in things where their strengths show up. So keep thinking about that as we continue to move forward. The last pillar is storytelling. And I'm going to paraphrase a quote from the Future School, which is an organization that focuses on using applied foresight for organizational innovation. I happen just to love quotes. I think a lot of people say things better than I can. But when we're talking about stories, they say that stories evoke deep images and emotions, allowing people to psychologically identify and connect with a collective narrative. They are the personification of an organization. When processes and rules are the driving force, the organization takes on the metaphor of a machine, lifeless and inanimate. But when we shift focus to telling stories, both the organization's story as well as individual stories, the organization becomes a living entity with others. Made up of people who are able to empathize with others and coordinate activities. So how might we foster storytelling in the workplace? Anybody have any thoughts on this? I know it's hard when there's only a couple people on, you sort of feel like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to answer. Okay, so a couple ways are we can, as leaders, once again, at all levels of the organization, continuously share the organization's story, get back to the ikigai of the organization. This ties directly back to belonging. What is the why of the organization and how does everybody's work align with that? Leaders can also share their own stories. Talk about your values and how they show up at work. Talk about how you find fulfillment. Talk about your successes and failures. And try to make it real and emotional. I think sometimes we tend to talk too much about success and not about failures. But there's ways of making, as we talk about our stories, we can make them emotional. What were you doing? What were you thinking? Where were you feeling? This helps people connect to us on like a real level. It requires vulnerability. But just for example, and this you can do just on your own, think of a time when you accomplished something that you were proud of at work. Would you be able to write it down and tell the story of your experience, the who, what, when, and where, but also think about what was driving you, what was inspiring, what was energizing, and what did you learn along the way? And I think we can all kind of practice telling those stories to one another because it helps kind of draw people in and it lets people know that they're not alone. We all experience successes and failures. But if we can talk about how our own values show up at work and how we kind of focus on that, that can help everybody throughout the organization. And then we can also collect stories of impact. So do any of your organizations ever ask for customer service stories for a report, maybe a board report or a report for the director? When we are asked for those stories, the reason that stories are so important is that emotional element. And so I think one of the things that we can do is we live in a culture where we're not really encouraged to talk about ourselves a whole lot, especially the good things. You know, it's considered bragging and it just doesn't look good. So we can share each other's stories. So when those call for those stories come out, in addition to thinking about your own stories that you can share, think about a colleague that you worked with who had a great interaction with a patron or created a great program or, you know, was able to make a breakthrough in a story time or what have you. But if we can collect those stories and once again practice telling them in a way that evokes that emotion, it can be a really powerful way of helping each individual staff member make sense of the work that they do and how it connects to the why of the organization. So once again, you know, just something that you can think about for yourself. If you happen to work the front desk or when you did, can you think of a time where you were able to help a patron in a way that affected you emotionally? I can think of several times where I did something that I would just think of as part of my ordinary everyday job, but the patron was able to thank me in a way that made me feel like I had made a profound impact on them. So when we all share our experiences, we create opportunities to change the narrative and to make sense of the world and the work. So as we sum up this first section, I think that we can all look back at belonging, purpose, transcendence, and storytelling, and leaders at all levels can help create meaning and purpose by asking, how can I help others feel like they belong? How can I help others see jobs and tasks as opportunities to help? How can I help people experience moments of playfulness and flow? And how can I help people share their story? So before we move on to the next section, you can either put it in chat or if you want to, you can just add it as a note to yourself. Think about something from this section that really resonated with you. That way, when you go back and look at the resources, you have that connection to look forward to. Any questions before we move on to hope? Okay, if you think of questions as we go through, don't hesitate to answer. That's why I keep looking to my left as I'm checking the chat. So I'm happy to address questions. All right, so the next resilience component is hope. C.R. Snyder, who was a psychologist who specialized in positive psychology and the author of The Psychology of Hope, says that hope is not simply a happy feeling, but it's actually a human survival mechanism. The definition of hope you can see on your screen here is hope is an individual's willpower plus way power to reach desired goals. Willpower then is the driving force in hopeful thinking. It is our mental energy, determination, and commitment, the belief that we can succeed even in the face of obstacles. It requires creativity and imagination. You actually have to be able to visualize a future better than today. Way power then are the mental models that guide our hopeful thoughts. It's the mental planning capacity. It's our adaptability to find alternate routes when obstacles appear. And then goals are the objects, experiences, or outcomes that we desire. So people actually need both willpower and way power to have hopeful thinking. If you lack willpower, you lack that mental energy to kind of persevere. And I'll say sort of for myself at this point in the pandemic, this is sort of where I am right now. We keep kind of trying to plow through, but I'm having trouble with a little bit of my own willpower. If you lack way power, you don't know how to plan. You don't know how to strategize. Maybe you're seeing too many obstacles in your way. But if you lack both, you actually believe that your desired goals are unreachable, which can lead to depression, fear, guilt, anxiety, and of course, hopelessness. So after looking, I went too far. There we go. So on your slide, and if you have the playbook, this is on page 5, we have some examples of high hope and low hope thinking. So you can see optimistic versus maybe having a negative outlook, being flexible and adaptable versus being easily overwhelmed, and increased self-esteem versus low self-esteem. So take a look at this for just a moment and see the differences there. But what I want you to take away from this is that hopeful thinking shares core beliefs. The future will be better than the present, that you have the power to make it so, that there are many paths to desired goals, and that none of them is free of obstacles. So you're going to hear me talk about that mind shift piece a lot today. And this is one of them, kind of that shift from low hope to high hope thinking. So after looking at the difference between high hope and low hope thinking, what might be some barriers to hope at work, or what might that look like for you? Feel free to put that in the chat. Fear. Yes, excellent. What else? If people experience low hope at work, what might that look like? Or yes, money, lack of money, or yeah, or having basically feeling like that's all you're working for. Experience. And everybody's experience is going to be different. Financial insecurity. Yeah, like I have to have this job, but maybe I don't fit well. Anything else? Boredom. Yes. Thank you, Ruth. Boredom. Yeah, everything from low motivation, low productivity, little pride in the accomplishments. Maybe what used to excite you no longer does. What about things like increased sick days, burnout, emotional exhaustion? And one of the things that I excel at, what about perfectionism? Low hope at work can show up in a variety of different ways, but for me, it can show up as perfectionism and literally like just trying to cross stuff off my list just to get them done. So it can actually make people feel like they're not enough, that they're somehow trapped, fear and paralysis. It's important to remember that another assumption of Snyder's hope theory is that hope is a learned behavior. We're not born with hope. We actually learn how to face obstacles in our lives from others. And typically this happens when we're little, from caregivers. But once again, not everybody has that same experience. The good thing is that we can also learn and share hope from others, even as adults. So leaders can actually help build a culture of hope. So when we're talking about hope, remember that both hope and purpose are working towards those future goals. So hope is really all about values in action. It's about trying to achieve those goals and the blending of individual purpose and values with those of the organization. So we can foster a culture of hope by co-creating goals with staff and colleagues. And so if you're looking for a place to take notes, this is on page 6 of your playbook. So first, let's talk about how we can grow willpower. Once again, that mental energy. We can do this by modeling hopeful thinking in a way that allows us all to kind of experience excitement about the future. How people think about the future is a key determinant in our future success. Organizations often spend a lot of time addressing problems rather than communicating how the mission and vision will lead to a better future. And in a way, it kind of makes sense. But if we can kind of shift that to focusing on, we're going through this because we want to end up here, and this is how it's going to make things better, that will help people connect to the vision and vision better. Day-to-day communications can actually either create hope or fear, as we stated in chat, that directly impacts and affects the emotional and cognitive psychology of each person, making them more open to innovation or more closed off. So if we can help people kind of create and sustain those positive emotions, it actually creates an upward spiral where the willpower or energy piece and the way power or those pathways and being more adaptable actually fuel one another. So can any of you think of a way that we can help each other create a sense of excitement for the future? And I can give you a hint for one of them. We've already talked about it. Any thoughts for how we can help others create excitement for the future? Help them set goals. Yeah, just talking about goals. Excellent. Yeah. How else? While you guys are thinking about that, I'm going to positive interactions. Yes. Thank you, Ruth. That's perfect. So as Jean mentioned, excuse me, let's talk to each other about the dreams and goals and skills that we need to achieve them. Help people visualize the future. For some people, it's easier than others, but actually have conversations about, for you, what does success look like? What does success feel like? And what skills do you need to get there? And making people feel part of the organization. Yeah, we're really talking about trying to connect those dots between what people are good at, what their own dreams are, and how that ties into the larger organization. So that's great. There's a term that I came across that I really love. It's called skill-based believing. And it's simply, if you can figure out what skills you might need to get to that next step to help you achieve that goal, then you believe you actually have the power to get there. So we need to remind people of their strengths, their individual characteristics, the traits that they have as individuals, that when they're engaged and energized, they perform at their best. So what you guys have talked about in terms of goal setting and positive interactions and making them feel like they belong. So once again, it loops in that purpose piece as well, is great. What about storytelling? We talked about storytelling a little bit, but this is one place where leaders, if you practice your storytelling skills, can actually help create that picture of a meaningful goal that helps describe that path. It's filled with struggles and exciting challenges, but we're creating a story that people want to be a part of and want to share. And then we've talked about this a little bit, but I think we can also help each other track successes and celebrate small wins. Once again, I think it's hard for a lot of us to actually talk about what we've accomplished and share that. So what if we flipped it? Instead of making people talk about what they've accomplished, let's talk about it for them. Let's send thank you notes. Let's tell their stories. And let's try to create a culture where it's okay to actually brag a little bit, because it kind of raises up the whole organization. So when then we're talking about growing way power, that is all about helping to remove obstacles. So hopefully, although this may not always be the case, supervisors may have more power to help establish an environment that can support goals that we're all setting out. That's, an ideal, where they're able to help each employee find the time and money to, get to their goals. But what might be some ways that we at all levels can help remove obstacles that our colleagues may face? Anybody have any thoughts on that? As you go through your day-to-day, are there ways that you can help others remove barriers? So we already talked about discussing ways that we can reach goals. And once again, this doesn't have to be a conversation between a staff member and their boss, but we can all talk about the goals that we're trying to achieve. And I think colleagues and peers have a lot of information that they can share. What about sharing resources and time? We can all kind of lend a helping hand at times. If somebody comes to you and they want to discuss something because they're a little stuck and they want a little bit of feedback, that can happen at all levels of the organization. We can encourage learning and growing together, helping others find opportunities or resources that might help them problem solve. What about experimenting with processes to get things done? Having conversations about how processes can be streamlined. So I think there's a variety of ways that, we might not be able to hand somebody some money to help them get their goals done in the organization, but we might be able to help them kind of see their way through some of the obstacles that appear. Okay, so has anybody attending today ever heard of job crafting? That's the last piece when we're talking about goals. Is that familiar to anyone? As we start talking about job crafting, I want you to think for a moment about what goals excite you at work. What portions of your daily work do you like the best? And we'll see if we can connect it to this next job crafting piece. So once again, we're talking about job crafting and how it will impact goals. So job crafting is a concept that was developed by professors Amy Wersosnowski and Jane Dutton and Justin Berg about 20 years ago. It's not new, but it was kind of new to me. So it is either a conscious or unconscious process of redesigning or reimagining your job to better align with your values, strengths, and passions. And it can be broken down into 3 areas. And if you're using the playbook, it is found on page 7. So the first area where you can kind of craft your job is the task, altering the form or number of activities one engages in while doing the job. And the whole point is to see greater impact. So each of us might have different levels of how we're able to do this, but it can be done by adding a task, dropping a task, or probably more realistically for most of us, because we all have tasks that we have to accomplish, it can be more about emphasizing tasks. We can change the time, energy, and attention that we give to particular tasks. Obviously, supervisors may have more power to help staff alter tasks, but once again, having those brainstorming conversations about individual job duties and actually talking about the impact they have on the larger mission can help people reframe those tasks. There might be tasks that you have to do that you don't really like, but once you can actually draw that line from the task that maybe seems minor to the greater organizational mission, then you might still not like it, but you actually can be maybe a little bit more motivated to get it done because you can see that connection. And once again, allowing staff maybe the freedom to experiment with ways to streamline processes and tasks. The second piece is all about relationships, exercising discretion over with whom one interacts with while doing the job. So once again, we all have to engage with our boss. We all have to engage with our team. The majority of you may have to engage with the public, and you don't have a whole lot of say in that. But where do you have say? Are you able to build relationships with those that enable you to feel pride, dignity, and worth? Are you able to reframe relationships that you already have at work in a way that reflects your values? Are you able to adapt any existing relationships to help you create a support network? So an example of this, like many libraries and other organizations, the Colorado State Library lost quite a bit of staff during the pandemic, including my boss, our state librarian, and other kind of leadership positions. So this spring, we were just sort of like, there were a lot of consultants without bosses. And every spring, late May, we had to set our yearly goals and budget. And I will let you know flat out, I was feeling 100% disconnected, unmotivated. I didn't know what to plan for because we'd been in this pandemic already so long. I didn't have a boss. Other people didn't as well. So I sent an email to invite all of the consultant level staff, so kind of my peers across the organization, to see if anyone was interested in brainstorming goals together. All of us, even people on my same team, work on different projects. But what I was really hoping for was a way that we could inspire each other and look for areas of collaboration. About 7 people showed up, and we just talked about our ideas for the next year, what we were putting in our goals. But we've actually continued meeting. We meet once a month to check in, connect, get help, and get feedback. So once again, we're all working on different things, but we're just kind of building our own little support network to help us get through this time while we're still waiting kind of like for new leadership to be created at the state library. So that's just one example where people kind of at all levels can help that relationship piece. And then the last piece I think plays into both task and relationships. It's perception or cognition, altering how one sees the job, changing the way that they perceive the tasks and the relationships. So once again, it's that mindset piece, but being able to mentally focus on the portions that they enjoy. And so I think job crafting can be a concrete way of helping people achieve those goals and helping them connect with the organization's mission and vision. So kind of as a reflection question, I won't make you put that in chat, but can you think of one way that you could or might want to craft your job? Maybe it's something that you can do on your own. Maybe it's something that you could talk to your supervisor, Or maybe you're a supervisor and you can think of ways that you might be able to help your employees craft their job. It kind of comes down to hopeful thinking. The ability to have hopeful thinking builds better solutions to problems. So hope is critical for organizations experiencing change. And we've all experienced more than our fair share in the last several months. So realistically, I think that we can all help each other build that willpower, that way power, that hope to achieve our goals and to help us tackle aspirational visions for the future. So before we move on to well-being, which is our next component, are there any questions about hope? Okay. If you all have questions, there'll be more time at the end, so don't hesitate to ask. But let's start with well-being. So just to give a quick definition, the Oxford Dictionary states that well-being is the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. But once again, I think it's more complex than just happiness. Like resilience, it is deeply personal because it's influenced by every individual's external environment, personal experiences, and our own sense of self. It encompasses mental, physical, emotional, workplace, and social health and satisfaction. Today, we're going to just focus on workplace well-being, which is the ability to pursue your interests, values, and life purpose in order to gain meaning professionally. If you happen to attend the session that I did in September, we actually touched on the mental, physical, emotional, and social components. But I will say that if workplace well-being exists, it will directly impact all of those other areas of well-being for individuals because we all spend so much time at work. So I think it's important to understand that neither mental health or well-being is a binary state. It's not either or. Workplace well-being can be seen as a spectrum from strong and steady to strained and stuck. And individuals can actually fluctuate across the spectrum at any time. It is probably safe to say that the pandemic has likely decreased well-being in most organizations. So it's important to remember that, one, resilience is correlated to stress, and people don't experience stress the same. It is based on experiences and resources. Two, stress is correlated with adaptation. The more we have to adapt, the more stress we're going to encounter. Once again, we have all encountered a lot of stress in the past year and a half. Stress is a cumulative force. So once again, it's going to continue to build on each other. So I think we need to consider individual needs and experiences, even in the workplace. I attended a webinar not that long ago where the presenter was actually talking about each and every individual in your organization has experienced their own version of the pandemic. And I think that that is very important to remember. Okay, so what might a lack of workplace well-being look like and feel like? Oh, did I freeze? Am I unfrozen now? Okay, I had a weird internet glitch, so are things better now? Thank you for letting me know. Okay, cool. Hopefully that will be the last one, but internet. Okay, let's try this again. What might a lack of workplace well-being look like and feel like? How do you know if there is workplace well-being or a lack of? Distrust, yes. What else? I think distrust is a big one. But as we go through, I think you'll see other things kind of coming to the forefront. So keep thinking about that. What we're going to do is we're going to dig deeper into the lack of well-being spectrum. Once again, if you have the playbook, this starts on page 8. And I'm going to tell you it's going to get a little dark, so hang on to your hope as we go through. I recently attended an excellent Better Up webinar where psychologist Adam Grant talked about languishing, and he has a great article that I have shared in your resources. He defines languishing as the absence of well-being. You're not depressed or burned out, but you're really feeling blah, unmotivated, dull, and unconnected, kind of how I was talking about when I was talking about kind of needing to connect with my peers earlier. The danger is that when you're languishing, you might not notice it before you actually start slipping into indifference. Work and society spend a lot of energy on high performers and low performers, and people in the middle can be forgotten quite a bit. And as we kind of start sliding into languishing, we might not recognize it in ourselves and others. Burnout is especially prevalent in service organizations, and it's kind of the next level up. I actually used to think about burnout the way that I now understand languishing. Burnout is actually more serious than that. Adam Grant describes that as emotional exhaustion, being so drained that you have nothing left to give at work. So he calls it job-related depression. And it can be caused by emotional labor, toxic positivity, compassion fatigue, job creep, lack of institutional support, and the constant expectation to do more with less. And then there's organizational trauma. So before we jump into organizational trauma, I want to talk a little bit about vocational awe. Some of you may or may not have heard that term, but it was coined, I want to say 2009, by Fobazi Etera. And it's this idea that librarianship itself is sacred and beyond critique. So for many people, it's kind of considered to be a sacred calling. This can be good and bad. We may find our place when we come to work in the library and feel like we find a place to belong, but it can encourage overwork and martyrdom, and it can actually underpin many librarians' sense of identity and emotional investment in the profession. So those resilience narratives can actually paint workers who feel burnt out or frustrated as failures who couldn't overcome adversity, versus thinking about what other reasons there might be for this. And since we see the work sometimes that we do as being beyond critique, we don't talk about it. So from that perspective, organizational trauma, much like languishing, can be hard to see and track. So I am going to try to give an example of this. This is also on page 9 of your playbook if you have that. So I'm kind of going to walk through kind of from the left and to the right and back again. So this is just one example of how organizational trauma can develop at work. The nature of of work impacts the organizational culture, which makes sense. And so libraries are service organizations. Because we're service organizations, that automatically impacts the culture that we live and work in. Culture then defines the identity of the organization, and it can either support or undermine the feeling of belonging, acceptance, and understanding. So once again, going back to that purpose piece and belonging. This is where vocational awe can creep in, because once again, some of us may feel like we were called to do this work, and others may not. Those that don't feel a calling might be made to feel less than at work because it isn't their calling. And those of us who do feel like it's our calling might get pulled into giving too much. So that's vocational awe. Service organizations, especially those that provide services to traumatized individuals and families, are susceptible to becoming a traumatized system in and of itself, because we end up having that cumulative layer of stress that can lead to compassion fatigue and burnout. So hopefully before the pandemic, many organizations were able to support psychological safety, empathy, and compassion to help kind of counteract burnout. But with crises like the pandemic, this narrative can actually be sidelined because the organization just needs to survive. So once again, in a way it makes sense, but organizations tend to shift, becoming more rule and policy driven, more authoritative. And if we remember the quote that I shared earlier about organizations being like machines, if this goes on too long, the organizational trauma can become the emotional norm. It can evolve into a toxic work environment where employees feel stress, confusion, lack of safety, feelings of loss, and dissociation from the organization. So organizational trauma is not just connected to the pandemic or other outside forces. And I invite you to look at some of the work that Katrina Davis Kendricks has done on low morale and librarianship to see how organizational trauma can actually happen from within an organization. And I've included that in your resources. Overall, all of us, no matter where we are in the organization, really need to recognize the signs of individual and collective stress, pay attention to what we talked about earlier when we talked about a lack of workplace well-being, a lack of hope. I will point out quickly that there are also some great activities for investigating workplace well-being in your handout, Self-Care for Caregivers. And those are things that you can use either individually or with your team or with your organization. So a lack of well-being can feel dark and hopeless. So how can we foster well-being at work? And once again, if we remember, hope and well-being are based upon personal strengths, mindset, and learning. So from a leadership perspective, our goal is to help others shift focus to their personal strengths and desired skill sets to improve their well-being at work. So if you're following in the playbook, this is on page 10, but we're going to talk about some strategies for building workplace well-being. And we're going to start with mindset as our foundation. I've talked about mindset quite a bit, but mindset is really an individual's lens to see the world. It's foundational to what we pay attention to and how we interpret the world. So at work, leaders need to be able to provide psychological safety, empathy, compassion, and trust. So does anybody want to share what psychological safety at work might look like? We've kind of talked about the opposite. What might psychological safety at work look like? So hopefully it's a place where you feel included, a bully-free environment. Yes, thank you, LaTanya. You feel included. You feel like you're able to share your ideas without being made fun of, without being made to feel less than. You're free to ask questions and bring up concerns. Once again, if we're talking about well-being, we want to be able to name and identify when organizational trauma or burnout might be happening. We want to be able to challenge the status quo, to think of new ideas and share. We need to shift away from the achievement culture and reject the cult of productivity and perfectionism, which we talked a little bit about. Meredith Farkas is a librarian, author, and formal child and family therapist, and she developed a model that she calls slow librarianship. I've included a link to some slides as well as a webinar that she did on this, but slow librarianship is good, humane, and thoughtful, and it focuses on values-driven priorities, connection and teamwork versus busyness and productivity. It allows people to be authentic and bring their whole selves to work. Once again, we talked about valuing people for who they are versus what they bring. It's all about teaching and modeling healthy boundary setting, which could be a whole session in and of itself. I'm not great with boundaries, something that I'm continuously working on, but encouraging people to ask for what they need and helping everybody decide what to say yes or no to based upon kind of those shared values and goals. Embracing a learning culture, the freedom to fail and make mistakes, but it takes time, curiosity, and creativity and reflection. And then I think lastly, we need to normalize talking about mental health and wellness. Once again, that spectrum. We need to talk about and recognize those signs of individual and collective stress. We need to identify organizational factors that can lead to burnout. And then we need to really make sure that staff understand the full spectrum of resources that they have available. Who can they contact when there's a problem? Does your organization have an employee assistance program? And if so, do they know where to find it and how to access it? How can they use the services that are available? When is it okay to use sick leave? Is it okay to call in sad? The next piece, then, if we move up from mindset, is all about skill set, and that's where leaders can help build people up by focusing on their personal strengths and learning. So a strength is not what you are good at, and a weakness is not what you are bad at, but a strength is an activity that strengthens you. It energizes you. It creates opportunities for flow. So we talked about flow earlier. So we can normalize talking about strengths and weaknesses and personal drivers. Think about what fuels your passion to do your work. And what is it in your role that drives your fatigue? And how can we have those conversations with others, with our peers, with our supervisors? What areas do people feel they have control over, or where do they feel like they don't? What was an expectation that someone had of you once that was aspirational? Or have you encountered expectations that seemed unrealistic? So think about kind of these examples. Some resources I've included in your handout include, maybe as a team or as an organization, you take StrengthsFinder. There's also another assessment that you can take. Marcus Buckingham actually was involved in the first development of StrengthsFinder. He worked for Gallup a long time ago. That he created, I think just before the pandemic, one that called Standout, that is free to take for the time being. I don't know if it's going to continue to be free past the pandemic, but those might be some tools where you can kind of start those conversations. It gives you something to build from, to have those conversations. And then it goes back to that skill-based believing piece where we talk about what goals people want to accomplish, the skills needed to get there, and then we help talk about where are those learning opportunities. Do you and your organization know where you can go to learn some of the skills? Do you have the freedom to do so? Are you given the time to do so? If you're a supervisor, how can you turn the conversation around to give people that time and the ability to learn new skills? And then find new ways to build networks. We talked about the boost meetings that I created, but there's conferences, there's coaching, and there's mentoring. So how can we all help develop a culture of learning? And then lastly, I think leaders can help remind people, especially when we get stuck, we can help remind people of what we already have in our tool set, the skills themselves, whether they be job skills, interpersonal skills, leadership skills. So we can encourage people to ask for what they need according to their desired goals. We can help people find the time for practice, feedback, and reflection. And once again, the boost meetings are sort of an example of that. So I know that that's kind of a lot to think about, but Adam Grant had a great phrase. He said, we can all support pronoia. According to Adam Grant, pronoia is the delusional belief that other people are plotting your well-being. And I love thinking about that. Wouldn't it be like awesome to show up at work every day with this belief that everybody else in the organization is plotting your well-being? They want to help you succeed. So on the flip side of that, as leaders, we can all ask ourselves, who have I impacted today? And it doesn't have to be big. It can be, once again, having those conversations. So hopefully there's something from this session that kind of resonates with you. In the interest of time, I am going to move us on to the last piece. If you do have any questions about this, feel free to put it in chat and I'll make sure that we do address it. So the last piece is the connection piece, that critical support network of colleagues, team, the organization, and the profession as a whole. When we're talking about connections with others at work, it's really crucial to building that workplace well-being and resilience. It requires support. I believe firmly we cannot be resilient on our own. And it's based upon learning and growing together and having compassion for ourselves and others. So Michael Stollard, who is the author of the book Connection Culture, he states that group cultures can connect people or isolate them. So remember when we talked at the beginning about belonging and those people who might feel invisible. So effective leaders really care about people and they're interested in fostering relationships. And so if you're following along in the playbook, this three-part model can be seen on page 11. So it starts with vision, that inspiring vision that produces a shared identity. So in a connection culture, People are motivated by the mission, united by the values, and they're proud of the reputation of the organization. But it's more than just talking about it. Once again, as we talked about when we talked about purpose and belonging, it includes a clear understanding of how we're accomplishing that mission. It's the values and action piece, and it's allowing people to draw concrete lines between the work that they do and the vision. Value then is shared empathy and compassion, where people are viewed as individuals, not what they can produce. So in a connection culture, we appreciate others' contributions, and we're constantly looking for ways that we can help others. And we can only do that if we know and trust one another. And thirdly, there's voice, knowledge flow that produces shared understanding. And I think about that in terms of like organizational learning, that learning and growing together. So hopefully in a connection culture, everyone is seeking the ideas and opinions of one another and feels able to share opinions honestly. So once again, that can only happen when that psychological safety and trust is in place, when that well-being is in place. But this increases respect, recognition, and belonging throughout the organization. So according to Michael Stollard, one of the key ways to transform the workplace experience is to build and nurture high quality connections. These are marked by positive mutual regard, trust, and active engagement on both sides. When you are having a high quality connection, you actually feel energized, more competent, and alive. They motivate us to move forward and to take action. However, fostering high quality connections does not mean becoming best friends with everybody at work. That's impossible. But it can actually be found in smaller moments where we're just present. We convey respect. We're willing to offer help and support. So even a 5-minute exchange with a patron that maybe you've never even met before can actually leave both participants feeling better, feeling like they've connected. So I'm going to share a story that is non-library related, but hopefully you'll be able to kind of draw the connections. So Jane Dutton and Amy Warsosnowski, if we remember job crafting from before, they actually did a lot of work in high quality connections as well, especially Jane Dutton. So what they did is several years ago, they interviewed hospital cleaning staff about the nature of their work and relationships with others in the hospital, doctors, nurses, etc. And what they focused on cleaners because dirty work is often not valued by society. And what they found was distinct differences in how the cleaners viewed their work and how connected they were to the organization. So many of these hospital cleaners spoke about feeling ignored and invisible. They saw their work as low-skilled. They disliked cleaning and regularly did anything outside of the scope of the required job duties. Others spoke fondly of even brief positive interactions with busy doctors who stopped to say hi, patients and visitors who said thank you or just simply acknowledged their presence when they came into the room. These individuals also reported doing more than the basics of cleaning, little things like bringing patients tissues or having conversations with patients and visitors and other hospital staff. The second group liked their job. They viewed the work that they did as highly skilled and critical in healing patients. In short, the cleaners who felt seen and valued saw their job differently. They saw themselves as caregivers. And to me, this is an excellent example of the power of connection, that power of belonging, purpose, and hope. So you might think to yourself, like, who in your organization might be feeling unseen? Jane Dutton states that there are 4 pathways to high quality connections: building trust, enabling tasks, modeling respectful engagement, and supporting productivity and play. So I'm going to share these on the screen here. Can any of you think of ways that we can do any of the 4? I was going to do them one at a time, but I think in terms of in interest of time, but do any of you have any recommendations of how we might build trust or help enable tasks, how we might model respectful engagement? Anything that you want to share in the chat? Ooh, hold regular meetings. Yeah, communication. Communication is awesome, and it's also hard, especially in large organizations, but having regular meetings where people can sit down and talk about stuff. And I love what Joyce added about avoiding a gossip culture. The more communication we have actually will help downplay the gossip culture, because we tend to make up stories about things we don't know about. I'm sorry, I keep looking at the chat and not the camera. When we find we don't have enough information, that's when we tend to make up those stories, which can lead to that gossip culture. When we're talking about building trust, I think it also goes to assuming best intent, helping people fulfill commitments, acting with compassion. If you make a mistake, which we all are going to, apologize and move on. And I think it also comes down to celebrating successes. And I think that's just really one way where leaders can shine. When we're talking about modeling respectful engagement, I think, once again, avoiding the gossip culture is excellent, but being present, empathetic listening, giving people our time and attention. And I think it's too easy in the world that we've kind of created, where we're busy, busy, busy all the time. Taking time to actually stop and listen to what somebody else is trying to convey can actually be hard, but something that we can all practice. When we're talking about enabling tasks, we talked earlier about being able to remove barriers to build people's way power. But there's lots of different ways that we can help others. We can forward an article about something that other people might be interested in, or we can help them with a project or recommend people for a project. All of us are learning and growing every day. So share what you're learning with others, whether it be in meetings or in an email. I think there's kind of moment-to-moment coaching that can happen when we're asked for advice, and we can also advocate for our peers. If we think back to that job crafting piece, we can think about ways that we can sort of change our own view of the work that we do, but we can help others kind of change that view as well. And then we talked about play and positivity a little bit earlier, but just making the world or the workplace a little bit less stressful by smiling and sharing a joke or an amazing story. You can make a game out of it. Count how many smiles and thank yous you give away in a day. How can you show positive curiosity? Like, what are you working on right now that you can share with others that might kind of help pique their own interest? So I think we can all change how our coworkers feel by fostering small moments of connection. And it can be as simple as, there's one colleague who has always worked remotely in my organization. And he and I have what I definitely would call a high quality connection, but literally every time I talk to him, he tells me, have I told you today that I appreciate you? And it's kind of become sort of a running joke, but at the same time, every single time, that statement brightens my day. So we're really talking about those small moments. So if we look back at vision, value, and voice and creating a connection culture, essentially social skills are a multiplier. They enhance learning, they enhance innovation and growth for individuals, organizations, and communities. So as we kind of move forward, before we wrap up today, I just wanted to check in. Does anybody have any questions over the connection piece? Feel free to add that to chat, or anything else that we've talked about thus far before we head into the wrap up. Okay. So hopefully this really brings us full circle and shows how individual and organizational values interconnect, and how staff and library organizations can build purpose, meaning, hope, well-being, and connections in a way that fosters resilience in one another. And I think it's important to remember that as we build resilience in others, it actually helps feed our own resilience as well. The document Self-Care for Caregivers, which I mentioned earlier, sums it up nicely when they say that the people that we serve, including the public, often have complicated and often overwhelming problems. To help them through their journey, we must create teams and organizational cultures that value the care of the self, the team, and the organization. And I believe that leaders at all levels are integral to that process. none of us works in perfect organizations, but I think we can all affect change. And once again, helping build resilience in others, even in small ways, can help us build our own. So the goal of today's session was hopefully to get you thinking about workplace resilience in a new way and think about how you can support resilience in others. I know we covered a lot of information today, and you have lots of resources available in the playbook as well. And once again, in the playbook, in addition to reading and stuff, I've put reflection questions and potential activities. If you're interested in looking at that, it starts must be on page 13, but on page 12 of your playbook, if you happen to have that handy, I want you to think about and add to chat if you are interested. What is one thing that you want to try or explore in the next month? What's one thing from today's session that you want to learn more about? And maybe what is one thing that you want to share? So feel free to put that in the chat if you like. I'm going to just bump forward to my contact information in case that anybody feels like they want to reach out. Once again, this is something I'm kind of passionate about and continuing to learn more about. But does anybody have any like aha moments that they're going to be taking away, maybe sharing with their organizations after today? Or are there any questions that I can help address for you before we wrap up?